Hello, good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to our people here. Also, welcome to the people watching the live stream at home. And also, on behalf of the Brauw, Blackstone and Westbrook, a warm welcome. That's the partner organization we've been organizing this evening with. My name is Marcia Luijten. I'm a journalist, and I'm happy to guide you through this evening. An evening in which we will dive into the oceans, into the rivers, because every year a few million tons of plastic waste get into those open waters. And every year we still produce more and more plastics. So the coming 10 years, there's an expected increase of 40% more plastics to be produced. Well, and then tonight we will talk about what is needed to cleanse these waters of all that plastic pollution. And where do you start? Well, when you're dealing with a problem of this magnitude, and what are the technical challenges, and what are maybe the legal challenges, and what should governments or companies or we as consumers do in order to permanently solve this problem? Tonight we'll speak with the ocean cleanup, we will speak with a lawyer from the Brauw who's dealing with the legal issues, and we will speak with the Plastic Soup Foundation. But there's also an opportunity for you, the audience, to ask some questions. But first we will start with Boyan Slat, because Boyan, as an 18-year-old boy, he had this big dream. He became world famous with a TED Talk in which he launched his idea of cleaning up that mess, of making a huge floating barrier that could clean up the world's plastics. His company, the Ocean Cleanup, is now 10 years old, still operating. Boyan is here. Please give him a warm welcome. Yes, Boyan, welcome. I think it's already 11 years ago that you started with the Ocean Cleanup. You made a first design to clean all the plastics from the oceans. That was like a huge floating barrier that would like suck in and collect all the plastics. But I saw that ever since you've been creating new instruments, you never stopped developing. And recently you have published or showed your newest design, the O3. System O3, is that right? Yeah. So I was wondering, what to you is the most exciting thing about System O3?
Sure. Yeah. This is working. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. We went to quite a few evolutions through the years. Of course, started with these nice artist impressions, but of course everything looks good and works in artist impressions. But
artist impressions always work. Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course it was System 1 back in 2018. That was a year of manufacturing. Many millions that went in that system. Then we towed it out, and then firstly it didn't collect plastic, which, as you can imagine, is a pretty important requirement for an ocean cleanup system. So that was slightly disappointing. And
it didn't collect the plastics?
No. So the idea was to use the natural forces of the ocean to propel the system forward. Yeah. But the forces were, actually, we made a little calculation error somewhere. So then the plastic was able to enter the system, but then also leave again. So on net, we weren't retaining it.
I think we have a picture of that first system. No, this is System 002. This is the first one, no?
That was the artist impression, yes.
Yeah.
It does look pretty...
Looks like a spaceship, yeah.
But yeah, so that idea wasn't collecting plastic, and then after 2-3 months or so, the system broke into two, which was not the best. Actually, it was around this time of the year, so it wasn't the best Christmas, 2018. And
in 2018, you put that in the water.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
That's System 1. And then...
We can see that now on the screen. Yeah, System 002.
Yeah, no, so that came thereafter. So because back in... and that's actually probably the toughest part of our journey so far. So we had that system that was in two pieces. It was really a struggle to get everyone and everything safely back to land. So how do you tow, half a system, all those kind of challenges. Meanwhile, our cash position was pretty critical. So we had maybe half a year of runway left at that point, early 2019. And of course, we had all these, the academics and media attacking us to say, like, look, the experts, told them it was never going to work, and the oceans proved them right. I think that was the New York Times headline.
So did you come at a point that you thought, okay, I'd better give this up?
Well, I don't think there's ever been a real option, because it's not like if we stop doing this that there are 10 other organizations ready to fill the void, right?
Yeah.
I think what's worse, I think if we fail, we are going to be used as an argument against cleaning up the ocean, because
So you it can't be done.
Exactly. So
This guy tried everything.
right,
Yeah.
and they had all these people helping, etc., and then it didn't work. So I think it's a sort of a big responsibility for us to to do everything we can, and then
Make it work.
And then I think we were kind of lucky. So firstly, the team was amazing. We pulled together. And within 3 months, we were actually back in the patch with a slightly adjusted version of that original design, which then did collect the first plastic in 2019. And also there were these, maybe you remember, back in the day, Facebook was still a thing. And for the old people here, it's maybe still a thing.
Still is, yeah.
But they launched these birthday fundraisers, so you can have for your birthday, it would prompt you, do you want to raise money for a nonprofit? And there was something weird in the algorithm that somehow the ocean cleanup was recommended most.
You always came first in all.
Yeah. So that year we raised something like 20 million from 2 million people.
Thanks to Facebook.
Through the birthday fundraiser.
Okay.
So that kind of saved.
At least that's a good thing of Mark Zuckerberg then. Yeah.
Yeah, that saved our ass in 2019, honestly.
Wow.
So without that, it would have been bad. So then we had enough runway, and then 2021, because, back in 2019, that system that did collect the first plastic, that was nice. But at the same time, it wasn't at the scale that could really clean the ocean. You would need something like 700 systems of that version, and also sometimes they would drift out of the patch. So we calculated that we would need like a fleet of 20 ships to just be herding cats, essentially, to bring them back to the patch. So yes, it caught plastic, but our job is not to catch plastic, is to clean the ocean, right? So then we decided that actually, if you need all these ships to do the herding, why don't you just use those ships to actually tow the systems forward? Because if you do that, you can actually cover a larger surface area, right? Because you can add more speed to them, so you sweep a bigger area. And also you can steer those systems to where the plastic is. And that's very important, because people often imagine this Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Of course, it's the area spans 3 times the size of France, so it's a massive area.
Yeah.
But
that is the garbage patch.
Right. So between Hawaii and California, 3 times that France. But if you really look into the actual concentrations, it's not homogeneous at all. So if you sail through it with a sailing boat, there would be days that you see plastics all around you, and then you can also have days that you see almost no plastic. So if you can consistently steer your system through those hotspots, of course there's just a much smaller area you need to cover.
Yeah. And now a bit fast forward to system 3.
Oh yeah, I forgot to answer your question, actually. So,
no, it's okay. We were getting there.
We had system 1, system 2, and then 2021 we had that first active system we call system 2, and there we actually started collecting huge volumes. So then every few days we collected as much as we did in all the years before then. So there's a good step up. But then still that system was 800 meters. And all the costs of the cleanup is really in the ship. So what you want to do is you want to maximize the amount of plastic you capture per ship in your fleet, essentially. So that's why we then said, okay, we want to make the system much bigger, 3 times the span, so that you sweep 3 times the amount of plastic per unit of time. So your cost is almost the same, but your harvest of plastic is multiplied by a factor of 3. So it's so system 3 is about 2.5 kilometers long. Just for context, like the city center of Delft, where I was born, fits inside of the arm. So it's quite it would take half an hour to walk.
And it's 2 vessels pulling pulling it forward.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And thanks to that, and by the way, it's still quite slow. So it's slow enough so that the fish can just swim in and
Escape.
out. So it's not really a concern. But with that, we clean an area the size of a football field every 5 seconds.
Every 5 seconds.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So
There are many football fields worth of ocean, though. But
yeah.
at least if we get this, so we've now had this new system in operation for about 12 weeks. Now we have a brief winter period, so we're idle now. But next year the goal is to really get the performance to where we want it to be. And with that, we estimate that if you then deploy 10 of those, you can clean up the patch in 10 years.
So that's now you're talking, huh? About because you collected 200,000 kilos. I learned that was like
400,000.
400 already. Oh
on
wow!
the patch, yeah.
But at the same time, the plastic getting into the oceans just keeps going on. Huh? So, do you feel the problem has gotten smaller because you're now being more and more effective, or is it getting bigger because the inflow doesn't stop?
So at the current rate, the inflow is still bigger than the speed we're removing it. So at nominal performance, you need about 2 systems to outweigh the arrival of new plastic to the garbage patch. So we're not yet at that point. So in the ocean, it's really about developing the technology. Once it's fully mature, which we want to get to next year, then we think it's the right moment to start scaling up to a fleet of systems.
Yeah. Well, after you started with this, quite some research has been done, because the plastic all of a sudden also became a topic everywhere. Researchers discovered, for example, that it's more effective to clean up the rivers upstream, because you discovered, I think it's like, what was it, 1% of the rivers accounts for 80% of the plastic pollution. So that would be in favor of putting the floaters in front of the rivers.
Sure.
Did these results really change your approach, or?
Yeah. So that was actually our research. So when we, I think it's one of the things I'm most proud of in terms of what we achieved over the past 10 years. Of course, we have the tools now. We've intercepted in rivers also millions of kilos of plastic, preventing that from flowing into the ocean.
Working now also in rivers.
Right. Yeah. But then also, we back in 2017 we were the first to map where the plastic is coming from, where it's leaking into the ocean, and indeed we found that just 1% of rivers do about 80% of the emissions. So then we said, okay, this is
But there's still 1,000 rivers.
Still 1,000 rivers, so it's not easy.
Yeah.
But at least we think it's definitely easier than
the ocean.
Going further upstream, and at the same time, of course, stopping the inflow is very important. We must prevent more stuff from going into the ocean, but it's not a replacement for dealing with the pollution for which essentially the prevention comes too late. Like if I could choose, I'd much rather catch a bottle in a river than in the middle of the ocean. But of course, it's essentially 60 years too late for that, right? So if we really want to get back to clean oceans, we also have to clean up the legacy pollution. At the same time, if we only do that, then we can never stop, right? So we also need to do the inflow. So that's why this two-pronged approach, tackling the rivers, cleaning up the legacy, that's really what we're about. So
it's not, your focus has not really shifted, but you're into a two-front approach now.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the extraction of all these tons of plastics, at what cost does it come? I mean money, and I mean side effects.
Yeah, of course, these things cost money, but at the same time, we're highly confident that it's a lot cheaper to tackle this problem, to solve this, than to not do this, which is, of course, the other option.
Because why is the option costly? Doing nothing? just leaving it?
So it affects tourism, it affects fisheries, it affects human health, it affects coastal communities that have to, that deal with that have to do the cleanups, right? So it's, there are actually various estimates, but you're always, the lowest estimates in terms of the direct costs tend to be in the tens of billions a year, while doing all the rivers, is in the order of 1 billion total, just to tackle all the 1,000 rivers. And to clean up the garbage patch.
1 billion total, you mean that's the total cost or cost today?
That's the total cost to stop plastic from leaking from those 1,000 rivers. So it's, and if you
that's
think
doable, no?
Oh yeah, and if you think of like waste management today is around $500 billion a year. So that's what money that government's already spending today on just collecting garbage. So, I think it's a total no-brainer to do this.
Yeah.
So I don't think ultimately it's going to be about the money. I think it's much. I think the bottleneck now is really proving to the world that we can do this effectively, that we can have the capabilities. So solving, a few parts of the ocean as a kind of a showcase, that's really the priority now to teach us how to do this effectively and also demonstrate to the world that we can do this and that this is scalable.
And then you'll find the funds to scale up. So roughly, what is like the cost of 1 day ocean cleanup?
You mean in the garbage patch or in
No,
rivers,
I mean in
or?
dollars or euros.
But
so what does it cost? Like if you operate for 1 day?
For an ocean system.
Now, like your operation now today.
Right. So the I don't have the per day number. So it's one ocean cleanup system for the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is roughly 25 million a year to operate, and about 95% of that is the vessel cost, right? It's just operating.
And that's also taking away the plastics, and so it's the whole process.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And I was wondering. Most likely there are also some negative side effects, aren't there? You said the fish, they managed to escape, but do you know of any side effects?
Sure. I mean, we do extensive research on this. Essentially, there's no legal obligation to do this in principle. So and I think we'll hear more about that in a bit, but we chose for essentially a self-regulating mechanism because we want to. Of course, the whole reason we're doing this is to maximize the good that we can do on the world, right? We're about preventing harm to the ocean. So the last thing we want to do is create harm ourselves. So when we go out there, we have 3 environmental scientists always on board to monitor. We have 16 cameras in the system to continuously observe, so that if there's any animal that gets too close, we can slow down, we can adjust course, we can choose to delay the emptying of the system, things like that. So
you never get dolphins that get stuck in the net.
No, I mean we see dolphins, but more like in front of the ships, not in the systems.
They always manage.
Yeah.
And for you, what is like the major challenge you're facing now? Now this is working at already an enormous amount of tons of plastic every day extraction. What is your major challenge ahead?
Yeah, so it's not a question anymore of feasibility, right? We know we can do this. The tools exist. Now it's about preparing ourselves for scale up, and that means that in rivers, we want to complete our first 20 rivers. Those are projects that are ongoing now, but there are still various improvements we can make with some. Some of them are still in the process of being deployed. So to have this solid foundation, again, to demonstrate we can do it, we still occasionally make mistakes where there's technical issues, permitting processes that take a long time, things like that. And we already have our hands full dealing with those things for 20 rivers. So when we go to the next batch of about 100 rivers, we don't want to kill ourselves with all these issues, right? So we want to to be disciplined first, really finish those 20 before taking the scale up step.
But there's also some political hurdles you've got to take always. like permits and
Oh, yeah.
not everybody's welcoming you.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily bad intent. It's more that there's just a lot of bureaucracy. We're doing something that is not, people are not used to this. So it's something new. So they have to kind of figure it out from scratch how you do this. So, for example, now we're in the process of deploying in the most polluted river in Indonesia. And there are 11 different authorities involved there. So you can imagine sometimes you have meetings with 50 people. Those are not very effective meetings if you have 50 people. So that takes so with oceans, I think it's still mostly a technical challenge, and primarily how do we get better and better at targeting those hotspots. So it's training the algorithm, making the software better. So it's more technical. With rivers, it's much more about the system around the system. So how do we scale that effectively so that we don't kill ourselves in complexity?
And you're confident that once you can prove that it's really very effective, that the money will also come. That's the least of your worries. I get the idea.
I mean, it's always a worry, right? So it's I think we to especially take the next jump in terms of our income, we need to have those milestones in place. So right now it's about making sure that we deliver the existing projects with the money we have, make sure that we of course it's a finite resource, right? But yeah, ultimately what we hope is that if indeed we step by step get to that scale up point, that we can prove, people will see the value of doing this.
Yeah, and you're tackling these things one by one. Let's move to the audience, because I can take 2 questions. Is this working? Yeah, it is. Anybody? Okay.
Hello, thank you. Thanks so much. My question was going to be around what happens with all the plastic that you collect, and how easy is it to kind of find recycling infrastructure and facilities around? And perhaps a second one as well on what do you think needs to be done to actually avoid all the plastic getting into the oceans in the first place? And yeah, anything that you're excited about on that.
Okay, thanks. Boyan.
Sure. So when it comes to the plastic we take out of the garbage patch, we have set up a supply chain to fully recycle that. So because we think there's actually still value in that material, we call it our gold, essentially. It's like a very special material. It has a story attached to it. So also in part of trying to find the revenue models to make this scale. We are now partnering with companies to bring that material into durable, sustainable products. So Kia, the car company, is sort of the first one, where we're now working with them to bring some of our material into parts for their EVs. With rivers, it's more complicated because, of course, these are spread out all over the world. We're in 8 countries. There is no infrastructure. The stuff we take out is total garbage. It's everything from literal cadavers to diapers to, of course, a lot of mixed plastic. So there you're much more reliant on the local waste infrastructure. But what we also, what is part of our ethos is to make sure that waste never ends up back into the environment. So we audit the chain of the waste there as well. Usually, the minimum is a landfill, but in some places like Vietnam, there's actually a waste to energy plant, and in some places like Los Angeles, where we also have an interceptor, Jamaica, and now soon in Malaysia, part of the waste is also sorted and recycled. So to again do the best thing we can do with the material that's taken out.
Okay, thanks. There was another question here. Oh, same question. Anyone else? Yes.
Okay, no, you keep.
I can keep it, yeah.
Thank you. I was wondering, you were telling that you started 10 years ago. You told us how much money you need. You told us that you still need another 10 years. And I wonder if that's fast enough. And who are the big partners? Who are the big companies and other companies, maybe United Nations Development Program? Are you working with them? And if not, why not? Sounds like a
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, we actually have since early this year, we have a partnership with the United Nations Development Program, actually. So, but that's more on the rivers. Yeah, definitely, networks like that can help accelerate, and we're always looking to do things quicker. I mean, to clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, we could also do it in 5 years, but then you, of course, need double the number of systems. So in a way, you're kind of constrained operationally, you're constrained financially. Essentially, the 10 years, we think that's sort of the minimum benchmark. Longer than that, I think it will be hard to sell. But
she thought it was way too slow.
Yeah, well, if you have any suggestions to speed up, we'd love to hear them. But yeah, I think if there's a silver lining there, the good thing is at the beginning, the garbage patch is at its most densest. So the curve of cleanup actually looks a bit like this, right? So in the first 3 years, you already have about 60% of your cleanup goal. So that's in terms of oceans, and then of course in terms of rivers, we also prioritize the places where the leakage is greatest. So just to name an example, the river where we're deployed in now in Guatemala, that one river, we estimate, emits more plastic, or used to emit more plastic to the ocean than North America, Europe, Japan, and Korea emit combined. So this is one river. So that kind of goes to show that it's very important to choose where you go. I mean, of course, it would be fun to do something here or in Rotterdam, where I live. I'd love to have an interceptor.
But it's great for people
but it wouldn't catch anything, right? So.
People can see a film, you standing at that Guatemala river on your website. It's amazing. It's
that one's the most insane
it's
thing
like
I've ever
a desert of plastic you're at.
Yeah.
So that's like
105 trucks per day is the peak we've taken out there. So,
one final question for Boyan, maybe? No? Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just wondering if when you started 10 years ago, you were the first one, right? But you don't have any competition. Are there other actors doing the same thing, or are you still doing it by yourselves?
Yeah. So with rivers, there are indeed now other NGOs, no-profits stepping up, and I think that's great. Any river we don't have to do is less work for us, right? Speeds things up with 10 years. But with oceans, unfortunately, we're essentially the only one. So I think, I think it's important to think in terms of counterfactuals, right? And with rivers, if we wouldn't exist or if we were to die tomorrow, I think ultimately it would happen. It would probably happen 10, 20 years later, but I'm pretty confident it's such a no-brainer. It's so cheap compared to doing anything else. It's about 0.1% of plastic that's used actually leaks to the ocean. So, it's such a no-brainer to just do that. And of course, we need to do the other upstream stuff as well, but at least it buys you time to stop it. But with oceans, it's a bit more abstract. It's farther away. There's quite a startup problem of it's quite expensive to get anything started there. It would never happen.
Okay. Thank you, Boyan. We will continue the discussion with other people. So for now, thank you, and we wish you
Pleasure.
all the luck with cleaning up our oceans. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, and we will continue the conversation with João Ribeiro Biraui. He's the Director of Public Affairs at the Ocean Cleanup, and with Irina Buga. She's Senior Associate at de Brauw. That's the law firm that is the Ocean Cleanup's pro bono partner. And so we've just listened to Boyan's endeavors to clean up our oceans. But what often goes unnoticed is that there come quite some legal dimensions with this work. And you've been cooperating on these legal issues. João is like the Ocean Cleanup, and Irina is from de Brauw. Irina, from a legal perspective, why is it interesting for de Brauw to work with the Ocean Cleanup?
Right. Well, aside, I think, from the environmental impact of the work, which is obvious, the work that we have had to do for the Ocean Cleanup is incredibly innovative, and it requires a lot of out-of-the-box thinking, a lot of holistic thinking, because the novel nature of what the Ocean Cleanup does triggers novel legal questions.
Because they operate at the high seas, and there's no jurisdiction on that. I mean, it's nobody's water.
It's exactly, and I think connected also with the fact that, and I think we'll talk in a moment perhaps about how that works on the high seas. It's also connected with the fact that let's put it this way, there's never a dull moment in the work that we've had to do for the Ocean Cleanup, precisely because of this legal, but also practically speaking, unexplored domain. So I think we've been working for the Ocean Cleanup now for almost 9 years, I want to say. And I've been working with Ocean Cleanup, I think, for 7 now. And I remember that some of the first things that we had to do for the Ocean Cleanup had to do with, for example, just to give you an idea, a mega expedition, the 2015 mega expedition, I think it was called, where the Ocean Cleanup was still researching the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, the GPGP. And they went to Hawaii for that research and sort of had these very enthusiastic private yacht owners volunteer to have their yachts sort of tow these nets behind them to help. And we sort of got the question, are there any legal implications? And yes, there are. So we had to jump on board, pun intended. And then, soon after that, there was the aerial expedition where I think that involved, correct me if I'm wrong, having a low flying plane sort of fly above the water with this massive sort of machinery hanging from it to take aerial shots. And then came the question, are there any legal implications there? Yes, there are. So it's definitely not boring work. Let's put it this way. It doesn't make it difficult to get out of bed in the morning for it either. So
good. Yeah, that's good for a lawyer.
Hope that answers the question.
And João, so I just said it's nobody's water. There's no jurisdiction. It's the high seas. Can you say then that there are absolutely no legal rules on the high seas?
So, adding to your point, it's not only the tech innovation, it's the legal innovation. There's a lot of legal innovation in what we do. And take what I'm going to say now, half jokingly, but the same thing that gave the Netherlands the golden age gave us plastic in the ocean. And so it was precisely because in the 17th century, there was a legal dispute between Leiden and some academics from Spain and Portugal.
Hugo de Groot, no?
Yes, and that created this idea that the sea belonged to everyone. When it belongs to everyone, it doesn't belong to anyone. And it took until the 90s to have a treaty, the law of the sea, to enter into force, to start having more stewardship about the high seas. But even now, by the way...
And who's the steward?
Yes, but even now, for example, we have that treaty, the law of the sea, but even the United States has not ratified that treaty.
Oh.
So that shows how the big powers, like the Netherlands in the past, still prefer open seas, because the power will govern over the open seas. Of course, this is changing radically. And by the way, the treaty, the law of the sea, came into force a couple of years before Boyan was born. And so Boyan is now starting this new era of stewardship, where we have also the BBNJ, which is the High Seas Treaty, that Irina also can talk a little bit about. And now we have the plastics treaty coming soon enough. And so all of this is creating... All of this is creating rules, the obligations by states to care, to have a duty of care in relation to the high seas, and hopefully with time that creates the political and legal incentives for the ocean cleanup to have more support in cleaning up the ocean.
So Irina already said it being nobody's water doesn't mean that there are no legal implications. Can you just give an example of a thing that you wanted to do as the ocean cleanup that you just couldn't because of legal restrictions?
Well, more than not being able to do it is we could do what we have been doing without rules, let's say. So I usually say that we submitted ourselves to the rule of law through this agreement that we signed with the Netherlands, the covenant, under which we have reporting obligations, under which, of course, we help the Netherlands to comply with its duty of care with the high seas, where we have reporting obligations in relation to bycatch, environmental impact, to do assessments. None of that was mandatory. We didn't have to do any of that.
But you said it wasn't mandatory, but because of this custom agreement with the Dutch government, you could also carry the Dutch flag. Or could you do that anyhow? And does it protect you?
Yes, technically you can say that. But again, the fact that the ocean cleanup was incorporated in the Netherlands, so that it was the first go-to government to do that, technically you could have done that with any government.
Any government. But it was necessary.
Not necessary, go for it.
There's also perhaps a lawyerly intervention to add that I think under this covenant that João just mentioned, one of the things that this covenant does is that, and I'll name a few other crucial points in a moment, but one of them is to confirm the relationship with and the role of the Netherlands in relation to the ocean cleanups activities. To put it in simple terms, the Netherlands plays, in a sense, a role that's analogous to a flag state. It's not the flag state because the ocean cleanup under international law has not been formally qualified as a ship. But what's interesting, and it ties into another sort of key point under that covenant, which is that it clarifies the status under international law of these novel systems, because there is no made-to-measure legal framework that exists for these ocean systems. And it does that by combining the rules on so-called marine scientific research under this Constitution for the Oceans, the Law of the Sea Convention, by analogy, in combination with the crucial sort of principles or rules from the legislation that applies to ships under international law. But all of that is applied by analogy for different sort of pragmatic, legal, and sort of creative reasons in order to, that's the creative sort of holistic approach that we were talking about earlier, to maximize compliance with potentially applicable international rules, given that there is no ready-made legal framework.
Because none of the rules were drafted thinking that someone will go to the middle of the ocean with a system to catch plastic. So it doesn't fall under any of the existing categories.
No. You already mentioned the UN treaty. That is, you as the ocean cleanup, you're involved, no, in thinking about what a treaty should look like. What is this treaty about? What difference would it make?
Yeah, so it's the so-called UN Global Plastics Treaty, and the ocean cleanup has observer status within the UN, so we can go to these meetings and contribute, sharing our research, our data. It's important also to share that when we catch plastic, we are also gathering data. We are understanding better the type of plastic, the quantities, all of that. It's very much valuable data to inform policymakers. So this treaty is being negotiated. It's expected to be finalized by the end of next year, maybe early 25. Countries are very committed to it. It's supposed to address plastic pollution in the environment from upstream, from production to waste management. But also we expect, and we are working very hard with several governments, to have an international legal obligation to clean plastic in the ocean in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So we would have a treaty with an obligation. That means that then states that join that treaty will have that legal obligation.
You sound quite optimistic, I must say, but usually if a treaty comes with obligations, many countries do not want to ratify.
Yes, but these treaties, from my point of view, of course, I always see treaty negotiations as a process and as a catalyst. We also work as a catalyst. We see already many countries adopting measures in relation to plastic pollution. Of course, with a treaty, with hard commitments, change will come faster. But I'm very optimistic that the negotiation of the treaty in itself will accelerate many changes already.
Yeah. Okay. I would like to invite Maria Westerbos now to join us in the conversation. Maria is the founder and CEO of the Plastic Soup Foundation. So that is another organization working on the same trouble. Because the Plastic Soup Foundation is an environmental non-profit dedicated to reducing plastic pollution. Maria, welcome.
Hi.
I think it will work. Just if you just.
Hi.
Yes, it does. Yes, excellent. Maria, how have you been listening to this conversation? Do you have picked up some remarks?
Yeah, well, what I miss in the discussion, if I hear you about Global Plastic Treaty in Nairobi, where I was too, but we never met before, is that you're not talking about the obligation to produce less plastic. At this moment, we are producing, now 2022, I'm looking at Jeroen, we produced 500 million tons plastic in a year, of which we throw away 40%, which is over 240 million tons, billion kilos that is. And that's single-use plastic. That's what we throw away immediately. And that's if you compare it, and it's oil-based. So, the planet cannot live with it anymore. It's the 10th boundary. We went far too far. We talked about it. You agree about that, and we are working on closing the tap. We want it to become less. We are completely focusing on the health of the planet and health of human life and animal life.
Yeah, closing the tap. I mean, that sounds fantastic, and at the same time, very ambitious. Is that realistic, Brauw?
Well, the treaty is really comprehensive, so it covers upstream production caps, banning of certain problematic plastics. It also includes midstream waste management, circularity, and so it's a very comprehensive treaty that will cover the whole cycle of plastic. So I think there are reasons to be optimistic. Of course, there is no such thing as a perfect treaty. If the treaty is too perfect, nobody will ratify it because it will be merely aspirational. And there is something relatively different in this treaty, by the way. For the first time in a global issue like this, the divide is not really global north and global south, because the major producers of plastic are actually middle-income countries. And they have huge industries producing plastic, and so there's a lot of economic dependencies. And it complexifies much more the discussion. And on top of all of that, plastic industry...
The fact that they're middle-income countries...
They have other economic and political priorities, and therefore you cannot just put this into a global north, global south divide. It's much more complex in that sense. So putting caps in production will affect some of the economic development, even though, I must say, these countries have been open to discuss it, and there is a coalition of states. I can name them, but Saudi Arabia, Iran, China, Cuba have set up a coalition that want to avoid that conversation on capping production.
Usually, if we talk about plastics, I think that, but I don't know the facts. That the champion production plastics is China. But I'm wrong if I listen to you.
No, production is spread through Brazil, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and of course in the US, so that you have this data point. So the second largest industry in value in the US is the chemistry industry, where plastic production is included also. And of course the consumer brands that also have production throughout the world. But there is a conversation to ban problematic plastics. I'm still optimistic that we will get something out of it. But again, the treaty is much more comprehensive than that. Includes also issues of waste management, waste trade, just transition. There are many societies around the world with waste pickers. And so if you solve plastic pollution, waste pickers will lose their livelihood. So the treaty also discusses just transition for these communities. So it's a very comprehensive treaty.
Are you optimistic about the treaty, Maria?
Well, I'm not so much, because we have an alliance of over 60 countries who are high ambition coalition, who is very willing to work hard on reduction and eliminating, but for example, the 16,000 dangerous chemical cocktails that go into plastic, because plastic is not only an inert substance. It's also, it gets its special, how do you say that? It gets strong or weak or whatever because of those chemicals. And it's, if you start counting what the health consequences are of these plastics, and I can tell you it's in the raindrops, it's in the clouds, it's in our crops, it's in our apples, it's in everything, it's in our clothes, it's everywhere. It's in here, we inhale it every day. If you start calculating the health consequences of all these plastics, then you will see that it costs more than we profit from it. And we are talking now with sustainable investors in and outside of Holland who start to understand that they are accountable for all this health damage and that they need to put their money somewhere else. Yeah, if you put your money only in oil and plastic, and those are two ways of industry that are working very closely together, you cannot keep on doing that. It's impossible if you want to preserve and save the children of next generations and the children living now. We have to act.
And what are the methods, or what are your tactics as the Plastic Soup Foundation to try to tackle that at the source, or to make governments responsible for their plastic waste?
What we are doing right now is we are for the first time into the working with financial institutes and calculating and finding answers on the question, how much are the health risks they are taking and what are the consequences if they keep investing that way? And they are working with us, so it's very...
those hard data will make governments move.
Yeah. No, this is the investors, because it's also the investing industry.
Yeah.
And we are also following the money, so we are following banks and what are they doing on the issue. And we are working on an interest group in Europe, talking with MEPs to see what we can do there. And we have a coalition of scientists, a strong scientist coalition specialized in health, and they are talking on our behalf during the INC and the UNEP conferences.
Irina, do you see if you listen to Maria, do you see legal opportunities and possibilities, or do you see obstacles and hurdles?
It's an impossible question. I see both. I mean, when it comes to the Global Plastics Treaty, I definitely see ambition. Let me put it this way. I think the Global Plastics Treaty generally has been compared to, if successful, it will be the most important multilateral environmental agreement since the Paris Agreement, right? And it goes with the current trend that João also mentioned earlier, not to sound too optimistic, but of the high seas definitely having a moment after the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction treaty concluded earlier this year, and now this. So, and I mean, the negotiation timing and planning is extremely ambitious. I am optimistic when it comes to at least certain issues, getting both more attention non-legally, but hopefully also reaching some form of collective solutions and more concrete obligations being laid down to combat plastic pollution than what we have now. Because, I mean, the reason why we are here today is because, from a legal standpoint, what we have are clear, in my opinion, obligations about what needs to happen, also with regard to, from prevention to remediation of plastic pollution, but not so much concrete and collective solutions to actually put them into practice.
But João, what you usually hear is, if you try to tackle a problem like this, that pricing the costs, all the external costs, like Maria just said, the costs are enormous. And then if you look at biodegradable plastics, if you call them plastics, they are so much more expensive still, so industry doesn't want to use them. So isn't there a movement going on of pricing plastic so much more to incorporate the external costs?
Yes, but a lot of the discussions in the treaty is precisely to create the economic incentives that makes recycling more affordable, that makes alternative materials more viable economically. All of that needs economic, fiscal, legal, political incentives. We are not there yet, but work like the Plastic Soup Foundation is doing is super important, also from a legal point of view, because we still lack a lot of evidence and more research on these matters. The fact that the foundation is creating so much research and data about the impact on health, by the way, that has legal implications, because that can fuel this idea of the precautionary principle, which is very common in relation to environmental protection, but that can be very relevant in relation to human health.
Yeah.
And so we really don't know. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, if I may, for example, biodegradability, we did a study with Wageningen University about biodegradable mulch on our agriculture grounds, and it seemed it was not biodegrading at all. And that became a big mess and a lot of trouble in the publicity, because the thing is that the biodegradability of these mulch are tested in labs and not tested on the earth. So you need to be more transparent about it, and you need to test it in real life and not only in a lab. And we have much more research like that. We need
absolutely, and it's super important. I also want to add one point to this discussion, because this is first world discussion. But we need to be a little bit more pragmatic when we go to certain countries that are growing very fast, with rising number of rising populations, with very challenging waste management systems, with consuming schemes that have to rely on plastic, sometimes to transport food in safety to certain countries. There's no technical alternative. So I always like to balance this, yes, but let's not ignore also that there are very objective reasons for certain countries to have trouble dealing with alternative materials or with bad waste management.
João, another question I wanted to address before we go to the audience. There's also such a thing as greenwashing. And some people, and I've also heard Maria saying that somewhere else, that you incorporate corporations working together, fully supporting the clean-up solutions, but that they're not reducing their own production or their emission of plastics. One such company is Coca-Cola, and you're working together with Coca-Cola. So how do you, how do you look at that matter? I mean, isn't that greenwashing by Coca-Cola? Aren't you being abused by Coca-Cola in that way?
Yeah. So the treaty will also discuss these matters, namely the extended producer responsibility, having clear rules on how these things need to be addressed.
But now to you, how do you evaluate such?
Well, first of all, we welcome that Coke realizes its responsibility in relation to the problem and wants to join those that are trying to solve a part of the problem. And that should never be criticized. And so in that sense, it's positive that they acknowledge their responsibility in relation to the.
Okay, taken. But you say that shouldn't be criticized, but also not when they're polluting a lot and do not stop that process.
Absolutely, but at the same time, we are the ones that are making that data visible. We are the ones that, by intercepting, allow people to count the number of Coke bottles. So remediation is also accountability in a sense. By intercepting and showing how much leakage there is and the type of plastic that is flowing, we are introducing these data points that will bring accountability to those that are polluting, to those that are producing plastic that is not well managed. So all of this works as a catalyst for change, including in companies like Coke.
Maria, does it work like that?
No, I don't think so. And you are counting, but you're not counting brands. I had a look at your way of with the app, your new app. Very interesting. We had such an app also, but very interesting. But you do not check brands, so you cannot hold them accountable. And the other thing is that Coca-Cola is like other industries, big industries, is looking for big chemical recycling units. What they want to do in the end is. What you throw on the riverside because you take it out of the water is taking away and getting back to a dump place, because ocean cleanup is not doing the end of pipe solution, and you just take it out, you put it on the riverside, and there it's taking away again, and it's going back to the same dump as where it went into the water.
Joao?
No, we don't do this. I don't know where you got that
You don't
information.
do it.
No, so it varies from country to country, but the golden rule is that it will never go back to the marine environment. And so depending on the country and the facilities and the systems in place, in some countries, as Boyan explained, it is possible to send it to recycling. In other cases, it goes to landfills. There is sorting.
Exactly,
sometimes.
but that's what I'm saying. It's going back to the landfill. And from there, because these landfills are not well protected, I don't blame this on you. It's the waste.
I don't know which one you are referring to, but
Well, I had a talk with somebody in your organization.
The point is that it doesn't go to the ocean, and that's the.
No, I understand,
priority.
but the thing is that it can leak again in the river, and you take it out again, and you put it on the side. It's going.
Yes.
Yes.
Technically, that's possible.
Circular economy.
Well, it's clear that there's like some difference in how you tackle both your organizations this same huge problem. Maria, do you cooperate, or is there like room for cooperation between your two organizations?
No, Boyan and I, years ago, we already said, I will stand on the top of a mountain and say, I stop it here, and let's work together when you come to the rivers. So now he's working in the rivers, so maybe we should have a talk again. But all these years when he was on the ocean, I waved from him on the mountain, from a mountain.
I think all these projects self-reinforce each other. They work as catalysts to have more support, to have
We
more
have a lot of respect.
And so the more projects there are across the whole life cycle of plastic pollution, the better for everyone.
Yeah. Let me see if there are questions in the audience. Yes, come.
I was wondering, is there a way to find out who's responsible for the pollution and also hold them accountable for polluting the ocean?
Who do you want to answer?
The production is the highest. We use the most plastic, so like Europe, America, USA, we are the most effective users of a lot of plastic. We have waste incinerators, of course, but a lot of the plastic that is produced in countries in Europe Holland is exporting that plastic to countries without waste management systems. So we are the second exporter of plastic waste, our plastic waste, to other countries where they can't manage that. So all these rivers that you see polluted in a lot of countries is not only the plastic from that country, but it's also our plastic, our ships and our packaging.
But then the second part of her question is, Maria, can we then be held accountable?
Yes, we can. We can
How?
hold people accountable. Bijvoorbeeld, what you can do is, it's almost there, ecocide. Ecocide is if you are, for example, destroying the Amazon forest. You can be held responsible for ecocide, destroying something that's very important for life on Earth. But you can only do that with, for example, the CEO. It's very personal, the CEO of a huge company. So you can, for example, go to court for ecocide for the CEO of Shell or the CEO of Unilever. Yeah, that's not yet there, but it's coming.
Can I add a point that it's really important on that? That's the billion-dollar question, actually, literally. We did some research on the catch from the ocean. So our researchers analyzed 6,000 pieces of plastic that was retrieved from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And they managed to identify, of course, that the large majority came from fishing industry, but they were even able to identify the countries of origin of where the fishing gear was manufactured. And they identified 5 economies as being the main responsible for the plastic in the Pacific Ocean, basically the US, Japan, a little bit also because of the tsunami, China, Taiwan, and Korea. So the point here is remediation, going out there and taking out the plastic and knowing what is out there. It will be the first step towards what we call in legal terms attribution. Who is responsible for it? And any future system of extended producer responsibility will need that data point. And that's why cleanup and interception will be very, very important in the future if we want really to attribute responsibility to a state or to a company.
Irina, how does that legally work? I mean, this is like the ideal picture. To make states and governments, and in the end, all of us are responsible. But how does that work? How is it going to work?
Yeah, I mean, the legal and practical challenges are intertwined there. I mean, to give you the answer in a nutshell, but still on the legal end, you have under international law the sort of traditional state responsibility regime where you could go out there and indeed try to identify, you know, every single bottle in the ocean, theoretically speaking, let's say, and then determine who the polluter is in theory. Let's say that conceptually and practically that would be possible. You could try to do that and say X amount of, you know, bottles come from this producer, from this country, or from this state, or from this ship flying this state's flag, and then essentially sort of attribute this responsibility to then repair that damage to that specific state. Is that realistic? It is not. And that, I think, illustrates why we, under international law and in practical terms, need to move from a focus on individual responsibility for, I mean, let's just take our example, how the legacy plastic got in the ocean and how it can be cleaned up, to a model that focuses on collective responsibility and regards it as a collective obligation. And even within that model, you can still differentiate among states and the amount they should contribute, for example, to this collective cleanup effort, potentially in terms of how much they've contributed to the existence of plastic pollution. And also, by the way, you can also take into account the degree to which they're impacted by existing plastic pollution. If you look, for example, at small island states that you can, as you can imagine, have a small impact on how the problem got there, but are highly impacted by legacy plastic floating in the oceans.
Yeah. So legally, there's still a long way to go. So what you would hope is that governments take responsibility. I lived in Rwanda, and at a certain point, Kagame, who's not a very democratic president, but Kagame at a certain point forbid all plastic bags. And I mean, everybody who's been in Africa knows that how many plastic bags there are around. I mean, they float, they hang in trees, they in every water, but it was forbidden all of a sudden, and nobody had any more plastic bags. So the litter diminished tremendously. But then if you take like governments like ours or the United States, we've come now to an era in which people are not very willing to sacrifice something, to give up a bit of comfort in order to clean up the ocean or improve the environment. I'm thinking about, the populist revolt, if I may say so. When you were introduced, Boyan is he's the genius, he's the inventor, you were the politician. So, Brauw, how do you then look at the political developments and what does that mean now for this huge mission you have?
Well, we need to make the case illustrating that there are costs. There are economic costs, there are social costs, there are aspirational costs in the sense that we have younger generations that value very much a clean environment, a clean ocean, that do not like to see turtles entangled in fishing nets. There are costs. Deloitte made the cost on 87 coastal communities, and it goes up to 87 billion a year of costs on the tourism industry. There are also costs in the fishing industry and shipping industry because sometimes the propellers get entangled in the fishing net. So we have to make a serious, concrete analysis of the negative impact of the plastic that is in the environment.
Okay, but then
that creates the incentives for political action.
Well, that is, you assume, but how to convince people who do not really care very much? And who do not want to go to the market and not get a plastic bag with apples and another plastic bag.
I'm not that pessimistic. I mean, the ocean cleanup has done this amazing journey from a little room at Delft to an organization that has 140 people of 35 nationalities with a regional office in Asia, operating in 8 countries across several time zones because of the support of many people. So even the plastics treaty is a result of more attention in relation to plastic pollution. When you check Google Trends and if you check plastic pollution, you see that suddenly, I would not dare to say it's because of Boyan or the ocean cleanup, but you see that a couple of years after the visibility that this work brought to plastic pollution, you see plastic pollution going up on Google Trends, which means that people became more aware of it. And so it's a process. I'm very optimistic, much more optimistic than you. I do believe that by 2040, maybe before, we will not be talking about plastic pollution anymore.
Maria, because you're working on education and
yeah, and you see plastic anxiety as you see climate anxiety, and especially under young kids. But the thing is, we are addicted to plastic.
Yeah.
It's like the techniques of the industry is like the smoking industry. The plastic industry is acting like the smoking industry. But
what is the comparison? Because
the same, it's transparent, you can look through it, it's hygienic, they say that already for 70 years. But, it's not hygienic because it's polluting, because there are chemicals in there and there's plastic leaking in your meat or in your vegetables. So I have thousands of arguments, but the most important thing is that we are addicted to plastic. What happens is that it's pushed upon us. So if you go into a shop, you hardly can choose for a product without plastic. Oh. You can hardly do that because it's everywhere. Oh. So if you close the tap and there's less plastic and you can choose for vegetables without plastics and with plastics, lots of people will choose them without plastic. Because if you have a little bit of common sense.
But then how do we get there?
Well, that's the story that we want to tell people. That's for your personal health and the health of your children, it's very advisable. So we're now talking with medical industry also and with doctors. It's very advisable to avoid plastics like putting it in the microwave or boiling plastic in water in the bottles and give your child in a plastic bottle milk that is heated in water. Don't do that because you're giving don't put plastic tea bags in hot water because you have 2 million little microplastics drinking at the same time. Avoid those products.
And it does work, I have the idea, because there was this tea brand, I just forgot.
We got them.
Yeah, because I used to drink these Moroccan mint, Moroccan spices. They were really great, until I found out that it was like in plastic, and you would get like 1,000. And now they have like natural texture.
Yeah, everybody, Unilever stopped with it immediately because we hunted them, not only us. We did it with many organizations. That's the fun of my work. Harassing big industries. I love it.
Good, but Maria, I was asking, I was just asking the same thing to, how do you, what do you think is like the major obstacle to making like a major leap forward? What is the biggest problem you're facing now?
It's also depending on money, and if I talk with chemical industry, or whether I talk with Unilever or with oil industry, they are really convinced that they are doing nothing wrong. So they are really convinced that this is the best for the world. And if it's as if we are blind, you know, if you have in het land der blinden is één oog koning. So only if you have only one eye and the rest of us is blind, then what should you say? But so it's about I believe in influencing women worldwide, because women are responsible for their children, more in another way responsible for their children, and we like to bring that message to also men, but as many women we can reach out to tell them, take care of your kids.
But you started your participation here in this discussion with saying the big companies, we chase them, we look what they do.
I just told that, not in the beginning.
You just said that, and now this coming year, 2024, it's the first time that big companies, the big multinationals, that they have to report on ESG. I
was going to add that on top of all of this, there's a lot of change happening, especially within the European Union, where there's a lot of regulations and directives on circularity, on waste management.
Exactly. So, but will they be reporting on the use of
they will
plastics?
have. It's mandatory also, because there is something called the EU taxonomy that to give access to certain levels of financing, to be considered a sustainable activity, you have to meet a number of standards. And at least within the European Union, this is highly regulated. So it is a journey, but I think it's on the right direction.
But they're very strict directives, I call their ESRDS.
No, but it's going wrong again.
And the plastic is not in it,
Since Timmermans is back in Holland, Ursula, the big chief of the European Commission, is going wild with industry again. But the restrictives of the European Parliament are getting less. But the most important thing is that Ellen MacArthur Foundation is working with a lot of industries and they are on speaking terms on being transparent about their plastic use, and they don't deliver. So Ellen MacArthur took out the samenwerkingsverband.
Oh. Yeah, but those are self-reporting obligations and projects. But under European law,
it's mandatory.
These reportings will become more and more mandatory.
Okay, let me move to the audience. Who has a question? I come there and then there.
Thanks. I have a question on the legal challenges maybe for John, for Irina. What is one of the most surprising legal challenges that you came across? And what is the legal challenge that you've overcome that you're most proud of or happy with or most notable?
Okay, it is the covenant, yes. I think for me both are the agreement that was already mentioned before, because of the nature of this agreement, that it's a tailor-made, specifically drafted agreement between a state and the ocean cleanup to deal with a completely novel legal situation. And the negotiations, as you can imagine, were extremely interesting. But not just from a legal point of view, and that's why it was such a satisfying project. The value of that covenant is that aside from the legal certainty that it provides and clarity that it provides, I think what's really, and the fact that legally it sort of lays a new novel path in a way, I think is also the diplomatic and political support that I think it lends to the ocean cleanups operations, and sort of further credibility, I should say, to those activities. So it's a very fun project to work on.
Yeah, I don't know if there is any US citizen here. One, okay. So there is a future legal challenge that we have been dealing with, and we are close to solve it. It's related to something called the Jones Act, which is a US federal act that was designed to protect the maritime industry of the US and to control the maritime transport of everything that goes to American ports. And that has been a challenge because only ships that are manufactured and under the US flag can do certain things in American ports. So we use these ships that have different flags, including European flags. And so when we scale up, we will need several ships, of course, and ideally maybe one day going to the US coast. And that has been a legal challenge that we managed to solve, actually by using an equivalence with satellite debris. So that was exciting. We kind of found a parallel. Of course, plastic didn't come from space, but still, it doesn't belong to anyone. It's in international waters, and there was an exception to the Jones Act as it was made in relation to satellite debris that had to be pulled back to onshore. And so that was also an interesting legal challenge that we had, and it's solved.
Okay, thank you, Brauw. The other question was somewhere here. Oh, okay.
My question would regard the legal innovations, and I'm also studying as a lawyer, and we learn a lot about international law and how the legal framework is so important to have. But now, like, we have this treaty, which is going to be 24, 25, and until everyone rectifies it and we reach to the goals of the treaty, what are your thoughts on it? Like, it's already amazing that there's going to be a legal framework, but are we still in time with legal innovation? Is it like, do we have time to create a legal framework, or do we have to, turn into politics more and, pressure governments more heavily?
Well, if we get this treaty within 2 years, it's already amazing. I've never seen a treaty being negotiated in 2 years. So that in itself, it's already a good sign. There's a lot of political momentum. Indeed, it will take time then to be ratified. It will require national plans. Yes, we are running out of time. We are running late. That's the leakage that is happening every minute is huge. The treaty, while everything starts to be in place following the treaty, the leakage has already been enormous. And so, but at the same time, there's no other way to do it. I mean, we just have to keep going. I do believe that you gave the example of Rwanda, and there are many others. Kenya also doesn't allow you to go into the airport with a plastic bag. So there are many examples of countries. Many of the things that will be in the treaty can be adopted today by many governments. And so I think the point is that we should put pressure on our own governments to adopt certain obligations that will come with the treaty. And the High Ambition Coalition, that it's mainly European countries, but also others from other regions, they have this high ambition to have a very strong treaty. But I keep telling them that most of the things that they want to put in the treaty, they can adopt today within their governments. And so that would be the best approach, to start at the national level, giving the example, so that then you could have a stronger international framework.
Maria?
Yeah, you are looking at a global economy. So if you do that as a country isolated, it's not doable. You'll have to...
Circularity, certain parts of the problem, waste management, many things that go into the treaty can be national.
If you look at Europe and you look at Europe new laws that come into place, then the rest of the world is looking at it. But it's very difficult because it's all trade, and plastic is a large part of trade. So it's not that easy to do that.
No, it's not. But
No,
considering
but
the whole cycle,
but you are too optimistic because
I am.
you are really too optimistic.
Otherwise,
because- no, there are big oil states that are trying to influence the treaty in a very negative way.
yes, they are.
Yes, and it's all about money. So, and governments are being lobbied. There's a lot of lobbyists
And
in governments.
But this is a great country to start that national conversation.
Yes,
Especially because it's the country in the world that exports more plastic waste.
I remember.
It's the country where certain of the biggest corporations in the world, you know this. So that's the point. We can have this conversation at the national
a
level.
member of the Dutch parliament from the VVD who got a lot of money every year just to go to the Coca-Cola reception at the end of the year. And then they fired him as VVD. But he got a lot of money from Coca-Cola. And you cannot underestimate how much lobbyists are around governments and making it very difficult to make decisions.
Okay. Yeah, one final question. Two more. Okay. It was for you.
Just a quick one. What would you guys say is the scariest sort of takeaway of what plastic could do to us? I mean, in my head, I think I read somewhere that it could sterilize the whole human race by 2050. So I'm just throwing that one out.
Okay, we need some horror, guys.
Well, I can bring you that horror because I work with Shanna Swan, and she is the messenger of this news. It's true that there are already tribes, for example, in Canada, where there are no more male-born. Especially men are very vulnerable for all the chemicals that are in plastic, and it looks as if men are not cannot reproduce themselves anymore around 240. Oh. And women, that's going a little bit better, but we have to take care too.
But that sounds like a powerful political message, doesn't it?
I'm sorry, I cannot make it better.
I have a more optimistic message.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you having kids?
No, but this is true, and again, this has legal implications in the sense that what I mentioned before, the precautionary principle is something very strong in law, and it will inform certain provisions and make these provisions in the treaty stronger precisely to protect human health. But the positive message is that I see in some of the countries that we are working, like the Dominican Republic, for example, we saw that just having one interceptor catching some plastic, or in Guatemala also, we saw a national conversation starting about waste management. And Boyan published something on his, I don't know, Instagram maybe. There was this sign in Guatemala that said, by the river, it said, "Don't be a pig. Don't let your trash on the riverbank. Throw it in the river."
Yeah.
No, this is very important to understand the social context of this problem. So being a pig there was, or not being a pig there was throwing it to the river. It's the waste management system. And because of our intervention, the conversation started going in the other direction, that the communities, the society in Guatemala started talking about waste management, starting putting pressure. I don't know if it's related, but there were elections in Guatemala, and there was a completely political shift after 35 years to the other side. It's not related, I'm exaggerating. I'm just saying that these things have a huge power to change the conversation at the national level. So
but
more
that has
optimism.
nothing to do with reproducing.
No, it changes the conversation, creates more
We'll deal with that later.
for measures. We need to be optimistic.
Who is asking for this final question? Yeah, that's quite some pressure on you. Huh?
I won't live up to it, but so thank you for laying out what seems like a very thought through and proven vision for solving this problem. And Maria, excuse me for a moment. Let's think optimistically that 10 years from now, the oceans are clean. This treaty has passed. It's the panacea that it's meant to be. It solves a lot of these problems. Focus on the stage, and Boyan, what is the next problem that you would focus and turn your attention to?
Air pollution, right? Air quality.
Maybe, yeah, boy, there's a...
Yeah, I mean, it's not a shortage of ideas, I suppose. But yeah, what I think, in general, I think there's a lot of pessimism about the future these days, especially in our generation. There's people are afraid of the future rather than being excited about it. I think there's even people in our generation that don't want to have kids anymore. I mean, if they can, of course. Because they think the planet's going to die, and there's no hope. So what I really hope is beyond, of course, that we solve the issue of plastic pollution in the ocean. That by doing this we can inspire people to realize that problems are there to be solved, and you solve problems not just by pointing at the problem, by having fights on Twitter or whatever, but by doing the things that humanity is uniquely great at, right? Is by organizing ourselves effectively to do something, by developing things that don't exist yet. I think what I hope is that the Ocean Cleanup can kind of be a recipe for that can also be applied to other problems in the future. So I think it's important that humanity is optimistic, because I think pessimism is what sort of preserves the status quo, and optimism is what moves us forward, is what gives people the drive to do things, right? So so that's what we hope to do. So.
Thank you. Yeah, you can sit down. I think that was a beautiful closure of what we've been doing tonight. I just wanted to, Boyan, to ask you finally, is there one takeaway of a thing that tomorrow morning when we wake up that we can do differently, which is a practical thing? I mean, you can say just avoid all plastics, but that is too much. I can't get there tomorrow morning, but what can I do tomorrow?
Go to theoceancleanup.com/donate.
Okay, good.
Or follow us. No.
Okay, that's a good one. We'll leave it at that.
No, I mean, Jerry, I think it's. I think the more people know about the problem, I think just the better it is. So that's, I think, something that's very easy, free. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you to all our guests tonight. I thought it was very inspiring and very clarifying discussion as well. Thank you to our audience at home. Thank you here, and we hope to see you soon again here in the Balie.